Hello again. The current rationale behind large-scale and ever-increasing immigration to Britain is that we need all those foreigners to come to this country to care for an ageing population and to do a lot of essential jobs. After all, the staff in old people's homes are often 100% immigrants. This is a perfect illustration of why we in Britain need them. Old white British people need to be cared for in nursing homes, and so we need young foreigners to look after them. It makes perfect sense. The same applies to the National Health Service, of course. Where would we be without all those foreign doctors and nurses? We should be grateful to them instead of carping on about immigration. I'm guessing that most viewers will have heard or read in the newspapers arguments of this kind, and so persuasively are they advanced that many of us are left scratching our heads and wondering if we are missing something here. We are sure there must be a flaw in the idea, but we can't quite see what it is. It might help us to see what is going on if we turn to a country on the other side of the planet and see how they are coping with this very same problem, that of an ageing population living on some pretty crowded islands. I'm talking, of course, about Japan. In our own capital city, London, only a third of the population is of white British ethnicity. 46% of those living in the city identified in the recent census as Asian, black, mixed or other ethnic groups, and another 17% belong to white ethnic groups. That is to say, they're foreigners, chiefly from Europe, Romanians, Poles, Ukrainians and so on. In short, two-thirds of the capital is not of white British ethnicity. How does the Japanese capital of Tokyo compare to this? Well, Tokyo has pretty much the same ethnic composition as the rest of Japan. That is to say, approximately 98% ethnic Japanese, and the remaining 2% made up almost entirely of other East Asian peoples, such as Koreans, Chinese and Vietnamese. Just imagine if London were to be 98% white ethnic. It is almost inconceivable these days. How on earth do the Japanese manage this? Well, to see what has happened in Britain but not in Japan, we need to think a little about the past. In the middle of the 19th century, two parts of the world were lagging behind other industrial nations and remained backwaters. In other words, North America as a whole was making good progress, so was Europe on the whole, and the Industrial Revolution had taken place, and Europe and America were forging on and becoming modern nations. The two exceptions to this general rule were the southern states of America and Imperial Russia. Their neighbours were getting on, making great progress in science, industry and all other fields, but the states which became the Confederacy, along with Russia, could not quite seem to get on in the same way. The reason was the same in both cases. In the Confederate States there was a reliance on slaves, and in Russia on serfs, who were slaves in all but name. They were bound to the land, and the land with the people living on it, the serfs, could be bought and sold. They were a commodity. They had no right to leave the land. If a crop needed to be harvested, then you simply needed to use more manpower to do it. It was cheap. You only needed to provide the workers, for the slaves or serfs, with food rather than wages, and so there was no incentive to develop mechanical devices to do the work more efficiently. So in Europe and the northern states of America at that time, people were coming up with ideas such as steam-driven ploughs, machinery to plough fields. So uh, it began with steam engines at either end of a field pulling a cable with a plough on it. It's far more effective than using people to do the same thing. In short, the modern world was arriving. In the southern states, though, There seemed no point in changing the old way of relying upon the brute force of labourers working in the fields. It was the same in Russia. We in Britain are in a similar situation today. It is easier and cheaper to pay some random Eastern Europeans to wash our cars than it is to invest in and properly develop automated car washers. Harvesting fruit in East Anglia is done by large teams of Eastern Europeans, and this has turned into a habit. One might not inaptly say an addiction to cheap labour. It is precisely the same as the cotton fields of the Confederacy. Rather than using huge groups of people to harvest cotton, as used to be done when the slaves went out for the cotton harvest, we now have machines called cotton pickers to do it instead. Do viewers really think that it is beyond human ingenuity to do a similar thing in this country with the harvesting of crops in Cambridgeshire and Lincolnshire, which we currently rely upon large numbers of immigrants to undertake? Could it really not be mechanised? This then is the chief reason that Britain has become transformed so that parts of it now resemble foreign countries. We find it quicker and cheaper to allow foreign labour into the country to settle here and do many menial jobs which could probably be undertaken by sophisticated machines that we haven't bothered to develop. The problem is that we allowed ourselves to get into this situation in the first place. Japan did not. In that country, when they encountered some of the problems which we have, their first thought was not, yes, we need more immigrant labour to solve this. The reaction instead was, how can we use our ingenuity to tackle this problem? It is for this reason that Japan is today 98% Japanese, with the other 2% being almost entirely made up of other people from East Asian nations. It simply never occurred to those running the country for a moment to solve any problem involving labour shortages or an ageing population by inviting millions of people from Africa and South Asia to come and colonise their country.